my name is Dragon's Pride, and welcome to Space Engineers. Today we are going to talk about planets, more specifically, orbiting them. Now, this is a rather small planet. It's pretty much just a spherical gravity in the center, with a couple of reactors in a planet. Now, it's a small planet, as I said, so currently, is it possible to orbit a planet in Space Engineers? As of this build on July 14th. Yes and no. It'll work for a small planet like this, but a large planet and gravity, depending on how they work and whether or not they use actual gravity, not this 1.0 g, will affect the speed you need to orbit it. Now, orbiting a planet has a lot of issues and things that lead up to the orbiting of a planet, including the trajectory you are on, your speed, and your how do I say this? And your distance from the planet. Now, in real life, the further away you are from a planet affects how much gravity you are affected by. Also, yeah, also dependent on the atmosphere of the planet and the drag you are getting from any particles in the atmosphere, then by the air and clouds themselves. Now, this causes a significant issue for keen software and space engineers. The larger a planet is, the more gravity it has, the bigger distance you have to be from the planet to be affected by its gravity. Now, without falling straight onto a planet such as this on a really steep angle, or flying out of the planet's gravity well, you have to have a very specific velocity, trajectory, and drag. Now, you saw there, I got a the right speed, the right angle, and the right distance. So, I'm in an orbit right now. However, there is orbital decay, so the longer I orbit, the more chance I will have to fall out of the orbit, which I'm not going to let you wait for, but it happens, trust me. I've sat here for hours screwing around with this. So, yeah, as I was saying, the bigger a planet is, the bigger gravity well it needs. And the more massive your ship means the more you will be affected by gravity. So that means the more effective gravity you have on you, you will need more speed to counter-react. And with that magical 104.5, or zero point 0.4, I can't remember, you will be unable to actually orbit a planet at a relatively small orbit around the planet. Now, this is something which breaks... Oh, there you go. See, I just fell out of the orbit. This is a problem for space engineers and keen, because of the fact if you have a speed cap, that will affect how small of an orbit you can have. And depending on the size ship you have, the harder it will be to get out of orbit, including almost making it impossible, which will mean if we start on a planet, we will have to build in 0G, or if at all possible, in the planet's orbit. Now, I know it's alpha, but let's not talk about that. We've had that discussion numerous times, and the end of this discussion is on it being alpha. The more hours, the more invested a player is in the game, the more vocal they're gonna be. And, depending on the person, aggressivism can be an issue as well. So, if I'm orbiting a planet, and I'm not using any calculations or anything, weight versus mass or anything, this will affect my orbit. And once it gets impossible, it gets impossible. So that means building large ships in on a planet and trying to take them off may be impossible, which means we are going to need to build large ships in space, as much like Star Trek. And another problem I currently have with the game is exploration. There's currently no reason to go within 30, 50,000 kilometers. Anything past that, there's no reason to go that far, at least in single player. Because of the fact there is nothing out there that you need that you can't find within 50 kilometers of yourself at the current location. And if a planet is there, you can just mine for it there. So, other than building larger ships and larger ships and larger ships and larger ships, there is really nothing to do in Space Engineers. Mind you, there is exploration random encounters. Now, this is pretty good, and it's a good thing in Space Engineers, but there's a problem with it, and that is the sim speed. If you are within 50 kilometers, a random encounter, like maybe a possible large station, will spawn in. That's fine and dandy, right? However, if you go and interact with that station, and by interact I mean moving blocks around, messing with the grid, it will have to stay spawned in the game forever. And if you're running a server, or you get to the point where you need to actually worry about your sim speed, this becomes a big issue. And with a voxel game like this, they can only optimize it so far. And frankly, I'm skeptical that we will ever see large ship battles, you know, unrealistically to the size of what you see in Eve, because that's not a voxel game at all. Now, also, the damage effects also cause an issue with that, computer usage, all that. You can turn all that off, but then you are playing a game that really doesn't have any objectives or anything to do. That being said, there is scenarios, however, without that happening in my game, in this my world here, I will have to leave every time and restart from scratch. And while that may be something you're interested in, I'd rather build a base and have something happen. Something like, say, I'm flying out of the asteroid, and then all of a sudden scenario 1 happens with my ship, and then I can actually test my ship without having to actually, you know, restart the game and restart from scratch every time. Now, there are a couple different ways you can actually fix this issue, at least in my mind. One, you can have these random encounters be an actual scenario that is triggered within the game. And if you get screwed, well, tough love for you. However, if you come up on this scenario, and, well, be frank, these are quests and missions. and you don't have the stuff for it, you should be able to run away. And, eventually maybe come back. And without any, you know, NPCs or anything in the game in its current state, I'll say it again, I'll say it 100 times, there's nothing to do. Now, if you read their mission statement, Keen is wanting to make a game where you build big, huge, beautiful ships. So, I've spent, you know, 20 plus hours building a ship, and honestly, that's not that much. I've built the perfect ship. It has thousands, hundreds of crew quarters, hundreds of everything, but now what? You have this large, beautiful ship sitting in a save file to where eventually it gets deleted and forgotten. And it becomes this competitive grind fest of just building larger and larger ships to the point where you run out of things to do in Space Engineers. Now, mind that there's always coding and everything, but what's the point? There's no use for these ships. So right now, Keen is listening to their community, thank God, and they're trying to find more things to do because honestly, this game has blown up like Minecraft. Not to the extent of Minecraft, but they're to the point to where they need to widen their horizons. Now, you did notice that I just fell out of the gravity well. That is another problem. On a server, if I log out for any extended point of time, I'm going to eventually, through orbital decay, either fall into the planet or fall out of the gravity, in which case my ship may be lost. And as you know, moving around on a ship while moving, even in multiplayer and single player, can be a haphazard thing to do. And once you get ships of any large size, there's really no point. So, basically, the only threat we have right now, the only threats, there's three of them: energy, oxygen, and meteorites. Or meteors, I guess you'd call them, in singular vernacular grammar. So once you get far enough, we can count out both energy and oxygen through the use of verse, through the use of solar panels and oxygen farms. And once they add hydroponics, that'll just be an easier way to grow oxygen. And if it just, sits there and generates oxygen, it's going to be overpowered. So right now, the only real threat is actual meteors, which everyone turns off. So there's no reason for guns, no reason for missile launchers, unless you play multiplayer. Or you load up to a scenario. And these scenario missions, you just enter the world, they'll give you a few starting resources, and you can go and do the mission. Which I'm fine with, that's a great idea, however, it really needs to be expanded. As I was saying before, what if you have your base, and you fly to a new area, 20,000 kilometers out from your objective. All of a sudden, you have a random chance of a scenario happening. So say you're flying out, you get 100 kilometers from your base, and all of a sudden, you're attacked by a drone. Or, something happens, maybe you get calmed from that or something, or you get hit by that meteor, and you need to fix your ship. Now, then it triggers that scenario, and you have choices on what to do. Now, how are you rewarded? Well, that's a problem. You can be rewarded with the resources themselves, which could work, or we could have some type of monetary gain in this game, which would require NPCs and an actual trade setup. Now, if you ever played StarMade, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now, all of these have their pros and their cons. Pros of this, it will add a big missing element to Space Engineers. It will add something to do and something to actually use your ships, and a reason to actually have a bigger ship. Cons, it adds missions and objectives, and we lose that sandbox element. Now, if any of you have played Spore, I still think that's it has good and bad, but that's a sandbox game that almost gets it right in my idea. However, it's too repetitive. Now, FTL is great for a game like Elite Dangerous, where you have missions and stuff like that. It's a linear universe, it changes with the players, just like EVE Online. However, in a blank sandbox like this, you still run into that big purple hippo in the room, as there's nothing to do. And I know there's gonna be this is alpha gamer crowd in there and everything, but then there's also the fact that this game updates weekly. But honestly, we need more communication from Keen. We need to know what their developmental plan is, which I believe would be really a good thing. I mean, this Cloak and Dagger might have been good last year, but we're at the point to where we have so many players who have invested countless hours just waiting for new features every Thursday so they can jump in, play for a few hours, and then go back to something else like Heroes and Generals or Rust. And mods can fix this, but you run into that gap where once you join a server, you can't use any of your old stuff, which, for better or for worse, can be a problem. And it just gets to this point where you just get discouraged. I guess that's my rant slash introductory video to Orbital Mechanics. So yes and no, it is and isn't possible to orbit in this game, and without a major update, or maybe even an engine change, there's really nothing we can do about it. Nothing Keen can do about it as of now. So I got sucked in early access by the, how do you call it? I'm trying to think of the right word. By the possibilities of this game. And if Keen can't get their act together, they're gonna start losing players. Heck, they've already started losing players. It's gonna turn into Minecraft. You know, it's still a big game and everything, but there's players like me who have ran out of things to do. And, you know, you play Tekkit and stuff so long, finally gets boring. So, you know, Keen, if you ever hear this, you really need to get something into the game that will bring back a lot of players. And that's, you know, you want it to be planets, but honestly, planets doesn't add anything to the table other than prolonging the end game, and it doesn't even do that. So, yeah. Well, I guess I'll end the video here. Thanks for watching. My name is George Fred, signing out.